All right, welcome to another episode of Full Rules with me, Adam Duthie, and today's guest was Dr. Matthew Tolstoy. Matt is an old colleague and friend, and it was so good to catch up with him. He is definitely one of the brightest minds that I've ever had the pleasure of working alongside and calling a friend. And so without any further ado, let's get it. All right, Dr. Matt Tolstoy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. It's good to be here.
And man, good to see you as always. Why don't you give us like a little kind of intro for people who may not know who you are?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Matt. I've been in the fitness rehab therapy space for the last 15 years. I sort of just right out of undergrad, moved to New York and started working as a personal trainer there. That's how we met over at Equinox, and that was kind of the foundation of my work with people, just spending an hour with somebody trying to change themselves in some kind of way. And then pretty quickly on in that process, I knew that I wanted to work in the clinical realm of that, help people with pain management and injuries and things, because that was just kind of what really spoke to me as I was working with people on fitness, helping them change their movement quality and movement capacities, and then seeing how that just dramatically changed their experience in a lot of ways was just very moving to me. And I was like, wow, I really want to go further into this. And so I went back to school. I became an acupuncturist of all things. We'll dive into that later in terms of how that came to be. But so I got a license to treat pain, to see people in that capacity, and followed that route for a while. It's obviously still part of what I do. And then in this last 6 years or so, I've been getting a lot more involved with combining the work that I've done on the rehabilitative front with psychotherapy. And I'm in the process now of getting my license to be a therapist as well. So a lot of what I do now is kind of blending this world of people who are having a lot of problems with their body. They've got symptoms, they've got stuff going on. Maybe they had an accident, maybe, something where they've got real hardcore physical symptoms. And they're also noticing man, just since that thing happened, I don't feel the same. Something in me changed. And sometimes that's very disorienting for people. And, we'll get into the details of this later, but sometimes when you approach that from just a physical rehab approach or just a psychotherapy approach, you kind of don't quite get to the thing that the person needs to get to. Because as we're learning more about the brain, those things are so intertwined. They run on the same hardware. And so that's kind of the recap of how I got doing what I do now, is because just following those threads of what people have needed over time that I've met, the failures that I've had to help people. It was a failure of understanding the intersection of all these different things. And so that's just kind of the quick recap of just, where I've been and where I'm heading now. But yeah, that's the overall picture.
Hell yeah. And this might seem like a silly question to some listeners because it seems like such an obvious thing, but what is pain? Because we very smart people, much smarter people than myself, don't even agree on what pain is, right? So what is pain to you?
Yeah, dude, I don't know. I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to say. You got some people on the spectrum of this argument that are just pain is whatever the person says it is. They have an experience that they don't want to have and they call it pain. And I'm well, there's a part of me that can get down with that. There's a part of me that can really understand that. You got people on the other side of the spectrum that are well, we can kind of dial in some more specific, whatever we want to call bio-behavioral markers that say, okay, this is pain versus, other terms that we could use. I think for me, there's kind of two arguments, right? There's a philosophical argument about what do you want? What do you want in the textbooks to be the definitions? And what do you want in the field to be called? When we agree on this term professionally, pain, what do we want to say? That's a philosophical thing. And then there's a practical thing of just well, okay, when I'm treating somebody, what do we do? And how do I contextualize that word? I think for me, I fall more on the spectrum of it's whatever somebody says it is. If they're having an experience in their body that maybe the personal definition that I would say is they've got an experience going on in their body that disorganizes them. Meaning, what I mean by disorganized is not just like you lose your freaking keys, although, you know, that can be a part of it, but it's just like it disrupts your thinking. It disrupts what you can do or not do physically. It disrupts your relationships. It disrupts your sense of yourself. There's something about it that doesn't make you more integrated. It makes you less integrated, and you feel the pain of that. And I think that that when somebody comes to me for help, that's the lens that I'm looking at it for, is that, and trying to understand how this person's system is constructing its experience relative to this unwanted experience, whatever that may be, like a physical pain or emotional pain. But there's some sort of thing, aversive experience this person is having that is kind of pulling them apart a little bit in some ways. And my job is to try to help them figure out how that pattern looks, and then what's something that can complement that pattern, so we bring more integration into that system again instead of less. So I don't know if that makes any sense. Some people are gonna be like, "Oh man, this dude's out when, you know, for Pluto or not." But that's how I think about it when I'm with.
I love that. Like it is what you say it is, right? Because, you know, somebody who loses a limb and is experiencing phantom limb pain, and I come along, I'm just like, well, the limb's not there, and so you're not experiencing pain, and end of story. It's kind of like a shitty take, you know what I mean? So I like that. It's meeting people where they're at. You mentioned going into or becoming an acupuncturist. I watched a 1 minute and 30-second video 20 minutes ago, so I'm basically an expert at acupuncture right now. But for those who aren't, can you explain what acupuncture is, and how does it work?
Well, first of all, link that 90-second video, because then everybody can be an expert. You know, we'll all be on the same page.
Yeah.
But what is acupuncture? Well, you know, hey, man, this is actually a way more complicated question than I think most people appreciate, because, you know, when we say something like, hey, what is surgery? You kind of go like, well, no, we're going to do something to your body. And yeah, there are all these different types of surgery, right? There's, you know, gastric surgery, there's joint replacement surgery, you know, there's brain surgery, there's all kind of things, but, you know, there's a commonality to it. And acupuncture is kind of the same in the sense that, I'll bring you all kind of behind the curtain here a little bit. Like, acupuncture marketing loves to say like, hey, listen, it's been like 5,000 years and we've got this figured out. You know, we've been just like working on this for 5,000 years, and there's been this like unbroken lineage of just anecdotal trial and error, verbal tradition that has been passed down. And, what else in the medical world has been, given a straight shot for 5,000 years? No one. It's just us. And, it's not really completely true. Like acupuncture, yes, has been around for somewhere around like 3,000 to 5,000 years, kind of depending on, how you read the history. But it's been very fragmented in its development over time. Lots of different families and schools of thought sort of like were developing in parallel, or maybe not even in parallel, going in very different directions, that it took a long time to become like a codified sort of thing. And so like when people say like, what is acupuncture? Well, the same way that I answer what is surgery, it's like, well, sure, we're going to use what's called filiform needles, meaning like the needles themselves are a solid thing, whereas a hypodermic needle, it's hollow in the middle. We call a filiform needle. They're pretty thin relative to other needles that you'd get, like, like I said, if you're getting a vaccine or an injection or something like that, like those needles, they're pretty large compared to acupuncture needles. So they're thin, they're solid. They're not as sharp as hypodermic needles. Hypodermic needles are designed to cut tissue because the damage to the tissue helps you absorb the medication that's being delivered. With acupuncture needles, they're obviously sharp enough to go through the skin, but the idea is that they're a little bit duller so that they don't, pierce blood vessels or, small capillaries. People say that all the time when they haven't had acupuncture, and then they get it the first time. They're like, why don't I bleed? What's happening? It's like, well, it's because they're really small, and the needles themselves tend to just push blood vessels out of the way because they're not like the same as needles that you're familiar with. But in terms of the generalities of acupuncture, that's kind of where the show stops. It gets real different after that in terms of well, why would you do this point instead of that point? What is your technique in terms of what you do once the needle is inside somebody's tissue? How many do you do? How long do they stay in? Do you use electric stim or not? Things get really, really, really fragmented from an approach standpoint. But, the most common denominator is, okay, look, we're using needles. We're going to use them in strategic spots in your body. And then there are a lot of other ways that we can dose that, and we can change that to sort of bias what we're stimulating, what we're going after. And depending on your practitioner's background, their sort of like philosophical orientation, those things can look like very, very, very different. Somebody says, "Hey, I'm an acupuncturist." I go like, "I have no idea what you actually do." The same way that, if somebody says to you like, "Hey, I'm a trainer," you're like, "I have no idea what you do." Like you could be, like walking people through a machine circuit, or you could be, like completely, out of your mind doing functional patterns or something like that. You know what I mean? And those hours look very different, very different, compared to the person's approach. And so acupuncture is kind of the same way. So anyway, that's the long sort of can of worms answer that nobody was expecting or probably even really cared that much about, but that's what it is.
First of all, I care, and I'm glad you brought up functional pattern so that I can use that as a segue to shit on them later.
Please don't get as hard as you possibly can. Just laying it up, please.
They're ridiculous.
Oh my God.
So based on this 90-second video that I watched, there's acupressure points in the body, and they are mapped to like different organs in the body, right? Has that been like studied, and like is it all just neurology, or like what's happening there, like, and how I guess I'm trying to think, because I know like people treat acupuncture or use acupuncture to treat like digestive issues or like musculoskeletal injury. It's like this wide cast net. Like walk me through, like, as a practitioner, like what are you looking for, and how would you apply this to a couple different issues?
Sure. Yeah. Well, in terms of, yeah. So, okay. So there are 12 major channels in the body according to, Chinese medicine theory. And they correlate with the different organ systems. But this is where it gets to be a little bit hard to parse out, is that, like, when we say something like the liver in Chinese medicine, kind of what we're really talking about is this like collection of multi-organ function that just got kind of like called the liver, which is different from when we say the liver in biomedicine, when we mean the literal liver. And so, like something like the spleen in Chinese medicine, we don't really mean the spleen. We just really mean like the collection of all digestive processes that sure includes the stomach, includes, the small intestine, large intestine, bile, all the things that are contributory to digestion, we kind of just call the spleen. And so when you treat the spleen in Chinese medicine, you're treating, certain aspects of digestion and certain things that share a lot of different organ systems. It's not just literally the spleen, which is very difficult for people to understand, because it is kind of a roundabout way of describing things, and it throws people off in their understanding, because you might read some stuff online. Nobody reads. You might watch a 90-second video. Somebody might say like, "Oh, I'm an acupuncturist and I'm treating this person for, liver spleen disharmony." And you're just like, "What does this mean?" And, it doesn't do a good job of like representing philosophically what it means, because it uses a lot of terms where we have other meanings for them, and it gets to be a little dicey that way. So anyway, that's my spiel about the organ system and the channel system on that front. But more practically speaking, like when you're saying, okay, like how do you think about, how does all this work? Like, how do you use acupuncture to treat somebody's elbow ouchie, as well as somebody who doesn't sleep well and gets like poor REM sleep? And like, how can it work for both of those types of things? And I am not a particularly like popular person in the acupuncture community for having these opinions, but my opinion about how it can work for all that stuff, and like, what are we really doing when we use acupuncture, and when we get results with acupuncture, like what's really happening, is that I think, at least today, for me, where I'm at, what seems the most reasonable is, I think acupuncture has a really interesting effect on the brain and in particular, the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system just being the branch of your nervous system that does all of these things automatically for you, hence the name autonomic. So speaking of digestion, it runs your digestion. You don't ever think about that. Like, you just got regulatory mechanisms at play that either speed up or slow down your digestion based on how much you've eaten or not, and all these other factors. So it runs that, it runs your heart rate, it runs your breathing rate, it runs your sleep-wake cycles, it runs a lot of things related to hormonal balance, So the autonomic nervous system is in the driver's seat for a lot of condition. Like, if you're not sleeping well, not hard to say, we have some sort of regulation problem inside your autonomic nervous system. Yeah. Pain is the same way. A lot of pain pathways share hardware with autonomic. Autonomics also run a large portion of your muscle tone. Like, when you're just sitting in your chair and you notice, like, wow, my shoulders are super jacked up and tight, or like my throat feels tense, or you get pissed and you notice that just like the tension in your body changes, even though you didn't plan to do that. Your autonomics are communicating with the other parts of your musculoskeletal system to make these things happen. And so it has a lot of reach into these different areas that acupuncture has become known to get some pretty good results in. Pain, sleep-wake cycles, GI stuff, anxiety, all these things have really strong ties to the autonomic nervous system. And so that's one of the things where, we've done some studies on heart rate variability with acupuncture, and it does sort of tend to help people balance out. This was really interesting. Helps people kind of balance out their heart rate variability. So if they trend a little hot and they run sympathetic all the time, it does kind of help bring them into a more variable place. If they tend to run a little bit hypoactivated, a little bit too parasympathetic all the time, it has a way of upregulating them and kind of bringing you into a balance, which is kind of a cool thing. But yeah, the studies that we've done with acupuncture and heart rate variability is like a window into how, for some reason, putting needles at these different spots in the body does seem to communicate some sort of stimulus to your brain that then makes you regulate your autonomics more favorably. And then that can have this wide-reaching effect on all these different organ systems of the body.
I remember, like, when you were going through school, and you might have been like first year or something like that. And I saw you at the gym, and I was like, "So how does acupuncture work?" And you were like, "We don't know." I was like,
Yeah.
"What? For thousands of years?" And like that shit is
Still don't know. Yeah.
It blew my fucking mind. So
Yeah.
is it like so is it like a pattern interrupt, basically? So it's like these acupressure points, and you're kind of intervening in some way, and that signal that's telling you what, or like that's affecting your sleep or giving you musculoskeletal pain or whatever the case may be, that you're kind of interrupting that pattern. Is that kind of like a good summation of what you're saying?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. It's like, in really general, oversimplifying terms, whether we're using acupuncture or any other type of intervention, this little heuristic learning thing gets thrown around the internet a lot, but it's just inputs and outputs. We give your body, and then therefore your nervous system and your brain, different types of inputs. That can be inputs with needles, that could be inputs with manual therapy, that could be inputs with a certain type of rehabilitative exercise that force you into certain like joint positions that maybe your body is like unfamiliar with or is guarding against. And by virtue of those different inputs, it changes the conclusion your brain comes to about what is happening in the environment and what its next best step should be. Your brain's always just trying to sense the environment and be like, okay, what is my next best move? So, and that funnels down to a really simple level of just like, if you drink a bunch of water, your brain's like, okay, cool. Hydration just came in, kidneys get prepped to, all these things, like these cascading things happen because your brain is just sensing everything about the environment, internal, external, and is just trying to do something that it thinks is the next best move. And pain is one of those things where if it feels like, hey, if you move that shoulder that way that many times, like, I think something bad is going to happen based on my previous experience. And so it uses pain as like, that's my next best move, even though psychologically you're like, man, I hate this. This sucks. I wish I didn't have it. There's some sort of input that's coming into your system that your brain is interpreting a certain way, that then based on that interpretation, it says, okay, pain is my next best move. I don't want to risk it. I don't want to get hurt worse. this is going to keep us in a good spot. And so acupuncture really is like a really type of interesting input, because first of all, the sensation of acupuncture is really, really, really weird. It's very weird. People describe all kinds of things, like it feels dull, it feels achy, they feel traveling sensation, they feel temperature change, they feel expanding, contracting, all these things. And what's really great about it is that it's oftentimes unassociated sensory experience. It's not like anything else you experience. Whereas, the tension of a stretch can sometimes feel like the tension of dropping into a deep lunge or a deep squat. And your brain's like, oh, I've been here before. I know what I got to do. I got to grab my hip flexor. I got to stiffen. Okay, yeah, this is bad. But when something is really unassociated because it's such a novel, new stimuli, that really breaks the pattern really effectively, because the brain's going, I don't have a file for this. What is this? And it can open up a level of adaptability and plasticity that then if you fill that window with new, more adaptive, let's say, movement strategy, now you got something that's really stacking together in a great way. And so that's how I think of acupuncture is, like a pattern interrupt, and something that is going to help you associate movement, relationships to your body, all these kind of things differently, because we just broke it so profoundly.
Yeah. And so I want to kind of jump ahead a little bit, because I feel like that it kind of fits nicely. So right now you're going into this like body-based psychotherapy, and I don't even want to because I have no idea like what that entails kind of on a whole. So can you walk us through like what that looks like kind of in practice? And I'm just gonna say the body keeps score. Like that's kind of the thing. And so like, is there any kind of like merit or truth to that statement as it relates to pain and movement and how we kind of interact with the world?
Yeah. I mean, hey, the body keeps the score is pretty much like the book that really put body-based psychotherapy on the map, for better and for worse, like all sort of landmark things. It brought a lot of awareness to an area that deserved it, which is great. It's also had some, regrettable outcomes, and it's not a perfect text, but hey, look, yes, the body keeps the score. Am I a body keeps the score, bro? Yeah. Yes, I am, and what do we really mean by that? Well, we mean that like kind of your segue is perfect, because it's like thinking about what we were just saying about how your body is always listening to the environment and learning from its experience, so that in the future it can protect you from things that are trying to kill you, or things that are going to lead to you getting killed. From just a purely survival standpoint, this is like ancient hardware that's been in our brains literally the time of reptiles and then mammals. That's been with us evolutionarily speaking for a very long time. Not everybody, this isn't super common knowledge, but like our brain stem, the lowest part of our brain is identical to the brains in structure anyway of reptiles. Like you can look at the same structures, and they're there, and they run, and they do the same things. And then over time we evolved, a limbic system and these other things that we share with mammals.
So lizard brain is actually like an accurate
100%. 100%. Some people are just running around with just the stem, man. Just all brain stem. No cortex. No, those people are real. They're scary people, dude. No, but it's true. It's like as evolution has not just grown it's not just our brain as humans. There's like sort of like one brain, and it kind of depends on like where in the evolutionary structure that organism left off. And for us, we're at the top of the chain in terms of like the most developed brain. But I was going on this rant to just say we share all of this survival-based circuitry. Speaking of the autonomic nervous system, all these animals have an autonomic nervous system. Like they run on the same principles. Now we have higher levels of the brain that can then have feedback and feed forward relationships that can kind of, change and adjust the way that these systems fire off. It's more complicated, but those basic circuits are the same. And so the brain is always looking for what is going on in the environment and how do I keep myself safe on a purely unconscious level. Sometimes you're aware of it. Maybe you walk into that car park late at night and it's like eerily quiet and you suddenly go like, whoa, what's going on? But before you became consciously aware of that, if we had like a SpO2 monitor on you, if we had heart rate on you, well before you became consciously aware of like, whoa, something could happen here. Something inside you was already going before you're consciously aware of it, just because it's built into our biology. And so this is what kind of brings us back to the body keeps the score, is that when we've had really intense, life-threatening things happen to us, what tends to happen is that our body mobilizes these incredible self-protective responses where, you think like, okay, if you have a moment where, the car hops the curb and you feel like, man, I'm going to get hit by this thing. There are things that just come online immediately for you inside your body. Your body just acts and it does stuff. You move before you know it. Your heart rate's through the roof. Adrenaline is coursing through your system. There's a high level of activation in your system that is just responding to the environment. And what happens in, events that don't go a particularly great way is that you have all this self-protective energy where your body's trying to react in a way that's going to protect you. And then something happens where that all of a sudden just gets immediately shut down and it gets immobilized really fast. So in the example that I just gave, there's going to be this moment where maybe you see the car hop the curb and you're like, your body's acting and you're going, I got to do something, but maybe it's inevitable and it hits you. There's a moment where that huge amount of energy that is trying to expend itself to protect you gets thwarted. Like all of a sudden it gets shut down because it didn't work. It didn't get to actually successfully, in this case, get out of the way, fight, flight. It didn't get to flee and successfully get out, but yet it's running this high energy strategy to do it. And then all of a sudden it's like the accordion gets collapsed shut with all that energy inside. And what we've noticed over time for people where that has happened is that the autonomics remember that happened. And it's like an open tab. It was like, whoa, dude, we had all this energy running in our system and we were trying to run. I was trying to I was trying to push, whatever. And I kind of didn't finish. And then it all kind of stopped. And like, now I'm in the hospital and the body kind of doesn't know what to make sense of with that because it remembers because it was such a life-threatening circumstance. It's not just like, oh, whatever, let it go. It was like, well, no. This was crucial. I think I almost checked out. So we got to learn from this. Did we finish it? Is the threat gone? Because I didn't do the things that I normally do when the threat's gone. To this part of the brain, it's like I pushed away or I ran. And then I realized I was somewhere that I was okay. And I met with my people and we're all like, okay, we're good. None of those punctuating moments got to happen. And so your system learned from that. It goes, whoa, dude, I got to be, and this is where people adapt differently, but it's like, I got to be on high alert. I got to watch cars more carefully. Man, I don't know about the sidewalk, and it cascades into this associative loop that sure has some conscious attention to it. Somebody might be consciously anxious about it. But I've also worked with a ton of people, we're in New York and everything, where it's like they say, hey, I get on the subway and all of a sudden I just have a panic attack. But I'm not thinking like, hey, somebody's going to come get me on the subway or we're going to break down and I'm going to be stuck here or somehow I'm going to be trapped forever and we're going to die. He's like, I'm not having these thoughts, but my vision goes tunnel vision and my heart goes out of my chest and I feel like I can't stand up. The body is just reacting to these associative pathways it formed based on things that happened to them in the past. And what's interesting about that, we were just talking about the structure of the brain, these higher order structures of the brain that can do like really complex, rational thought and language and abstract thinking. You can tell yourself a million times verbally, like, hey, it's cool, I'm fine, don't worry, that's over, blah, blah, blah. But there's not that many connections between that part of the cortex, the most developed part of the brain, and your limbic and autonomic nervous system in that way. There's just like not a lot of connections there. So it's not very good at regulating those responses. So then to bring this all the way back to what you actually asked me, is in body-based therapy, what we're trying to do is access the level of the brain and the nervous system that are running those high, intense, automatic responses because they speak a different language. They speak the language of bodily sensation, of movement impulse, and we're trying to link those things back together with your conscious thinking, with then giving some sort of sense of conclusion to the event, to what the system is perceiving as maybe still a threat. We can let it know in like a visceral, physical way that it's not. And you just don't do that by talking to yourself or talking to somebody else the same way. You can get some layers of that, but you need a different type of approach. And that's That's where when we say the body keeps the score, that's what we mean by the body keeps the score. And that's what we mean by a body-based approach to therapy.
It's fucking
Thanks for
awesome.
coming to my TED Talk. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
No, this
Yeah.
is great. This is fucking awesome. I was thinking about three things. So, number one, for any non-New Yorkers, somebody is always coming to get you on the subway. So be aware. Don't bleep. Um, but I saw this meme a couple weeks ago, and it said, "Why does everyone in the grocery store feel like my enemy?" And it really like it like set me down this like kind of similar to what you're talking about, this like primordial part of my brain. It's like, well, because on some level they probably are, right? It's like this is where the resources are. I need this to be alive. You're fucking looking at that brand of oatmeal that I like. And what if there's not enough for me? Break out the club. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
like I
Yeah.
laugh at that meme because I genuinely will feel like that. Like if someone's like in the supermarket, I'll just be like, get away from me. Like I had just like I don't know, like it just like spoke to me. Maybe that speaks to my own insanity. But I thought that was so funny. And but the other thing I was thinking about is so I got last year I had a Muay Thai fight and I got KO'd with a spinning back elbow. Right, I just like wham right in the jaw. I mean, hit the button, and I was down for like 15 seconds. And I watched the video, like when I got home, and nausea, just
I was
instant
gonna say,
nausea.
don't
Like,
do that. Don't do
yeah,
that. Yeah.
dude,
Yeah.
watching it happen and like seeing myself just go, and I had to turn it off immediately, and I got like physically nauseous. And what's more is my Instagram feed is just like people just killing each other like hand to hand combat. And I've curated a very nice feed for myself first thing in the morning. And I was just watching like some like stadium Muay Thai fight, and it was like the same thing. I saw somebody get. I was like, everything else was fine, but I saw a spinning back elbow, and it was like no instant nausea again.
Yes.
And I literally could not look at my Instagram for like a couple of days because it was just like it was bad. That was crazy.
Yeah. Totally, man. Your body kept the score, dude.
Yeah.
That's what we need. Is that and what's so great about the what you just said is like two major levels. Number one, I think it's pretty easy for people to understand how watching the video of that happening to you can create a physicalized response because it's you and you're watching it and it's like, okay, there's that. But it speaks to the generalizability of our threat detection system, these primordial parts of the brain. It just has to be close enough to what happened. Even if we can make all of these psychological distinctions, like in the second thing, the video of somebody else, you don't even know these people. Maybe it happened 9 years ago and it's just a clip from some highlight. You can create all the psychological distance in the world, but the second a part of your brain sees the angles, the shapes, elbow goes, it hits the jaw, it just goes boom, that's similar enough, and it triggers the self-protective responses that way of like, get out of here, this is not good. And so this is where, again, like the subway example, maybe a lot of these people that I've worked with that have had panic attacks on the subway have not had events happen to them on the subway. No, but they have had things happen to them in close quarter environments. They've had things happen to them with a certain number of people present. They've had things happen. There are other things about the environment, your body, and these parts of your nervous system are just picking up automatically that if enough of them are flagged as like, oh, we've had a thing with that. We've had a thing with that. Oh, and we've had a thing with that. Boom, send the heart. Go, 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 go. And even though it seems so different, it just has to be low resolution, similar enough. And the body's like you just said, I'm not going to be caught sleeping again. I'm going to catch this even earlier than I did last time. Boom, run the defense, run the response. And then it over delivers what it needs in that moment because it's trying to stay ahead of it, even though the environment no longer matches that response.
Yeah. There's like this urban legend in like jujitsu and combat sports in general where like if you like okay, so we strangle each other, right? And if you're not tapping in time, you go out. Okay. It happens infrequently enough, but often enough that, anybody who's been training jujitsu any appreciable length of time has seen it, right? And so there's this urban legend that if you continually continually not tap and let yourself go out, that it just keeps happening sooner and sooner and sooner. And like people will ask me about this and like, is that true? And I'm like, I don't really know. Like, what's your take on that? Like, if you had to
Mhm.
like gun to your head, like guess, like, do you think that mechanism? Do you think that A, that's an actual mechanism, and it B, like, what is that?
Yeah. Oh, I've never heard of that, but that is interesting. What do I think about that? I think there's a large part of me that can totally reason out that your body in that moment is going like, oh yeah, I know where this goes. Well, first of all, why does it pass out in the first place? Well, of course, you're restricting blood flow to brain, but it also passes out to protect you, right? Because sometimes this is like some overlapping defensive responses. Like, hey, look, you get choked, and there's literally like a blood fluid dynamic that causes you to go out. Like that's the primary driver. But also, what going out does is, if you think about it from just like an animal kingdom kind of thing, that type of like freeze and collapse response, it's not the same type of freeze and collapse. So when you freeze and collapse, you're still conscious and whatever, but there's some shared physiological territory between where you don't hurt yourself worse by resisting and struggling. Sometimes, if we're thinking about like predator and prey, predators become disinterested when the prey stops resisting, things like that. And so these are all ways that then the system, I'm speaking to it more from like a freeze and collapse response where you remain conscious, but the way that people's systems learn to do that more sensitively is your brain is getting feedback of like, oh, this is keeping me safe. I'm still alive. It is getting me through these circumstances successfully, even if there's collateral damage. The brain doesn't give a shit about collateral damage. It just matters if you die or not. And so if it's getting all of this reinforcement that the strategy is working, it's going to bring it on sooner and sooner and sooner, because it's getting quote unquote rewarded in terms of like it winning by doing that. And so I do wonder if there is something at play where, the body, somebody's in a choke and their body registers the pressure and all this other stuff. And like, it goes, yeah, I know what to do. This is what works for us. Boom. And then you're out 2 seconds earlier every single time it happens, and that can creep up on you because of what your nervous system is learning to do to adapt and survive to those circumstances in response to that threat. That makes sense to me for sure. I don't know if that's actually physiologically true, but it is me, winging it on it.
Yeah, I mean, like, no one's signing up for that study, right? Like, yeah, come on down. We need 20 healthy males put unconscious and suffer brain damage. You know what I mean? That's funny. So walk me
Yeah.
through like so like a body based therapy. So like, are you using like movement stuff in conjunction with talk therapy, or is it like talk therapy then movement stuff, or is it what does that actually look like in a session?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what's cool about it is that it's very open ended, and you can kind of, I never know. This is the biggest thing. This is the big thing for me when I was transitioning from like like my skill set and what I learned to do as like a medical provider versus what I've learned in a skill set as being a therapist, is that the biggest difference for me in the therapy room with somebody in a session is I have no idea what I'm going to do. I have no idea what is going to happen. I have no idea about anything, because the goal is to help attune to somebody's system and then help their system reorient and reorganize. And you don't know what you're going to encounter. It's way more open-ended. And so sometimes things start out with like, hey, maybe we found this to be relevant in like a number of sessions with somebody, like, hey, actually, why don't we start with some like basic movements or something, like simply just stretching their arms out in front, because maybe we bumped into that in a previous appointment and that did something to their physiology. We start out by doing that and then sort of track its response in the body. Yeah, sort of talk about it. Maybe a lot of times what I do with people from the beginning is we're just learning to get you in touch with how your body communicates its state to you. So people will come into me in the beginning and be like, hey, I have all this anxiety after, let's say, a certain event happened. One of the first things I'll ask them and we'll explore is like, what is it that's happening inside that tells you that you're anxious? Because anxiety is not a noun in the sense that, if you have a tumor, you have a tumor. That's a thing. You have something. But anxiety is not a thing. Anxiety is a multicolored set of events and processes that happen that then get called a noun anxiety, but it's actually a really detailed, ultra individual specific process because everybody's threat detection system and everybody's threat response fires off differently. You know, there's commonalities, but people tell me things all over the mat when they say that they're anxious. And so a big part of what we start in body-based therapy is just like, what is happening inside? You know, I'll even start, somebody will be like, oh, it was a really bad week. Cool. Tell me about Tuesday. And they'll tell me about whatever happened at work on Tuesday. And as I'm watching and tracking them and with them, I might notice something kind of changing. Maybe their voice changes a bit, or their posture changes, or their eyes are doing something different, or their breathing gets more shallow. And oftentimes I'll just kind of be like, hey, I just kind of want to pause you real quick and just be like, what do you notice happening in your body like right now as you talk about it? And of course, it's not at the level that it was at when the event happened, but just like how you said, when you watched the video of that thing happening to you, something will be evoked right now. I mean, even listeners right now, like if you just think about, you know, whatever that email you didn't want to get that you got in the last month, or the thing that, you know, was just irritating to you, and you bring that to the front of your mind for a moment and then just track the sensations in your body at a subtle level, things will happen and you can attend to that. And a lot of what we're doing in the beginning is noticing the sensations, because that's the language of how these responses are communicating where they're at to you. But normally that happens out of awareness until they get to be like 7, 8, 9 out of 10. But the problem is at 7, 8, 9 out of 10, only so many things kind of can help you at that point, because you're so getting, you know, rocket shipped to the moon. Whereas if we can start to recognize the phrase I use with people is like, I want to learn more about what it's like for you when you're getting on the on-ramp, not when you're on the highway, but what is your on-ramp like? And those will be subtler in nature. And normally your brain is pushing them out of awareness because they're not strong enough for it to care about. But if we can direct your conscious attention towards it while we evoke a little bit of the charge here, it begins to learn to track those things as relevant. And then you can notice, and this is where as people grow in therapy over time, they'll say things to me like, yeah, dude, I was at the grocery store, man, and somebody was looking at my oatmeal, and I felt that thing happening in my throat. And so I just took a second and I looked around, I like kind of checked out my peripheral vision, and then I felt kind of that like downward flowing feeling in the front of my body. And I was all right. I was good. You know, because we learn like the physiology of both how you wind up and how you unwind. And then how can we engage with those things more intentionally? But we do that through movement. We do that through talking about it. We do that through intention. But all the time with body-based therapy, it's about the experience of what's happening right now. Yes, something very bad happened in the past, or yes, something was awful yesterday, or maybe you just got in a fight with somebody right before you walked in. But it is about trying to evoke some element of that right now in the moment, but then work with it in an intentional way that, like we said a half hour ago, that pattern interrupts your stress response. Because your system knows what to do. It goes, I know what to do. I figured it out. It's A, B, C, D, E, F, G. But somewhere in that process, something happens to you that you don't like. Something happens to you that causes your symptoms because of the way it learned to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So can we get you A, B, C, D, and then change something and then do something else? And then the nervous system begins to learn like, oh, I have more options for how I can respond to these stresses, these threats, these environments. And I'm sure you're already hearing it. This is the same thing we do in physical rehab. There's a physical stressor, and if the body is used to, in an invariable, inflexible way, just dealing with that type of physical demand by stiffening up your back like crazy, hey, it works, but it bothers your back. What we want to do is pattern interrupt and then show your body that it has all kinds of options, not just one. And then that's what helps alleviate the symptoms. And why this works in both environments is because you got one brain, and you got one stress response. And that's how all this stuff fits together. And that's why I do what I do, is because of the overlap between what we're doing. Anyway, thank you for coming to my TED Talk part 2. That was like 19 minutes, but you know.
No, this is great, because like the more you talk, the more I can just piggyback off of your knowledge and make myself appear smarter than I am. But you basically just described like combat sports in a nutshell too, though, right? It's like we put ourselves in these like scary situations where, and like, you know, you probably don't know, but like there's like this meme, it's become a meme, like of blue belts quitting jujitsu, just because like they go from white to blue, and it's like now they know everything, and they leave jujitsu. But I really think it's some of it anyway is probably just like the constant exposure to like kind of scary situations, like getting choked and getting your joints fucking stretched out. Um, I believe it just has some like under the hood type, like anxiety. Anxiety being a noun is hilarious to me. It almost feels more like a verb, right? Like in like there's something's happening when you're anxious, you know? Um, and I think all the stuff you're talking about really kind of fits well into just training in general, right? Like you have this problem, right? And then you over time develop solutions on how to deal with this problem. Like a couple 20 minutes ago, we were talking about um just movement. You know, I was just thinking about how I don't even like think anymore really. Like when I'm met with a certain situation on the mats, it's just like, okay, like you did this. And so my body will just automatically do this thing as opposed to like, you know, shutting down and going into like full defensive mode. Like I will almost always kind of react in some type of like offensive mode. Um, Super interesting. I think like even just physical fitness stuff works like that as well. It's like you just develop these like different strategies. And it makes sense, like one brain, one stress response.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the thing that I also want to underline, because I don't want to give people the wrong impression, when you mention about you have these automatic responses, that you don't have to consciously think about because you've built these patterns and they have succeeded for you enough times on the mat that your body just goes, yeah, I know what to do, pop, 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 and it responds that way. I want to make it clear that the overwhelming majority of our automatic responses to things are very, very good. And there's a huge survival advantage to doing that because it burns less energy. You are better at what you do because there's less delay. You just, boom, do it. That's great. There's a lot of things about that are very, very, very good. The things that just people come to see me for is when that process goes awry. You have automated yourself into a response, whether that be the way your body responds to a lunge and your knee hurts, or the way that your body organizes a response to your anxiety, to an environment that provokes anxiety, and then how you deal with your anxiety. Like what people come to see me for is when those automated things, work in this sort of like most general sense of the word, meaning you survive, but it comes with a high collateral cost that people are unhappy with because of the automation of it. And they feel stuck in it because it got automated, and then this is the cycle that they're in and what we're trying to do. But the overwhelming majority of that mechanism is great because it allows you, this is what training is, to train automatic pathways that are very, very helpful for you in that way. And so yeah, you got one brain, you got one stress response. And then the idea is to try to have as many ways to execute those responses as possible, because that makes you as adaptive, as open, as flexible, as responsive as you possibly can be. And it just means you got more cards up your sleeve to be able to deal with situations differently, which, on a practical level is a good survival advantage. But then also from let's say like a body mechanics standpoint, that's great because it means that you have a lot of trust and security and you're trading the stress around the joints of your body differently. You can move with your arm in this position, in that position, in this. You can respond in a fluid kind of way because your body has opened up a lot of possibilities for you. That tends to make joints, tissues feel better because the stress is being like traded around in different locations instead of just, when I reach, I got to just do it this way because that's the only direction that I've got control. The tissues that do that direction of control are going to get hammered all the time and it start to probably talk to you.
Yeah. You're familiar with like ecological dynamics and the ecological approach and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Do you kind of subscribe to that? Because we talked about like the central governor and like kind of having these generalized motor programs. And that kind of comes more from like an information processing type motor learning theory. Like what's your general take? Like do you subscribe to one or the other?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I definitely lean towards the ecological side just because it just makes sense to me from how the brain is organized.
Yeah.
For the overwhelming majority of our evolutionary history, we learn to do things just through constraints in the environment. That's it. I've got a task. I'm trying to do something. And these are the things right now in this moment that are in the way of me doing the task. Then you can show up 10 minutes later and be like, I'm going to do the same task, but now the obstacles in my way are different. So I learn a different thing, and that's how we just learned to do anything in the environment for the longest period of time. So I think that the sort of like those pathways are greased inside of our brain to learn that way because it simulates our natural environment in the best way possible. And so it just makes a lot of philosophical sense to me, given, just the structure of the brain and everything. And I think for people too, it's a way that people can engage with a practice, whether that be training or whether that be the exercises they need to do to get out of pain. Uh, it helps people kind of engage with it in a way that I think relates to them more, rather than trying to tell them, sure, look, information is important, and I think that that's crucial too. But getting the balance right between like information and explaining why something is important and exactly what's happening, but then also staying task oriented. People are good at just like having a goal and trying to do something to pursue it and do that and do this. And what do I got to do? I got to keep my back on this wall while I reach and do my drill. Okay, fine, whatever. Like, I think that that's just like a more human way of communicating and connecting with people when they're trying to do something, instead of telling them something that's like really intellectual,
Yeah, and coming from like our background, like the fitness S&C kind of realm, it's so fucking prescriptive. Like this conversation like between information processing and ecological dynamics has been like raging on in sport for a very long time, but I feel like in the realm of like fitness and S&C, it's like fucking taboo. It's like you squat this way. I mean, listen, when you have, a 1RM on your back, yeah, you better fucking squat a certain way. But like, these like overly prescriptive, explicit instructions that we came up on, that I was guilty of for probably most of my career. It's just I'm having this like whole sea change in the way that I approach movement, and it's been really awesome, but it's also been really challenging because I still kind of find myself drifting into these like, do X, Y, Z, and so like learning how to kind of marry common sense with a theory that makes sense to me has been a bit of a challenge. Have you kind of experienced any of that?
Yeah, dude, 100%, 100%. I think, like in my world, the way that this plays out is, there's all this raging debate about whether or not the way somebody moves matters for their pain. If somebody has 20 degrees of shoulder internal rotation versus 90, can we blame their shoulder pain on that? Because there's all this research. Well, hey, there's tons of mofos running around with 20 degrees of internal shoulder rotation that have never had shoulder pain in their whole life.
Right.
So that must pop the balloon. And it's like, well, my take on this is like this, is that, yes, I came up on all the minutia of your movement matters. If you are missing 4 degrees of left eyebrow elevation, dude, you got neck pain.
You can breathe out of your
like,
left nostril on that rep. I saw that. Do it over.
Yeah, like that means you're gonna have neck pain. And then the most fucked up version of that is, well, you don't have neck pain now, but you will in 25 years. And it's like that's just such a soft thing to hide behind, because you trying to draw a straight line between that and 20 years from now and be like, haha, I told you. It's like, that's just got you. It's just like, that's such a bad take. It's such a bad take. And it's just it's not all right. It's not all right to tell people that. So anyway, my point is that I came up on everything about your movement matters, and we're going to correct everything about your movement and go from there. And I've definitely gotten away from that and have a way more open mind about that for 2 reasons. Number one, reading the research and understanding how it's very difficult to prove in any significant way that the way that somebody moves matters in their pain. It's very hard to prove. Now, that's a hard thing to prove, anything, period,
Right.
because it's so multifactorial. So that's not to say, this is going to take me to the next point, is that I don't think that your movement is irrelevant, though. I don't think that if we improve your body's rotation, that it will be irrelevant to you. I don't know if it'll be the whole story, but I do movement evaluations on people. I do that. And I do try to see the patterns that people's bodies are stuck in, and then try to help them develop new patterns around that. I think, I was just watching a 90-second video on social media by Michael Shacklock, who I had the extreme pleasure of taking his both of upper and lower courses on, it's called neurodynamics, meaning like when you have certain type of nerve pain that comes from nerves not sliding very well against the structures that they should slide against, and that can create a very particular type of pain. He's done incredible research on nerve pain as it relates to the pressure dynamics with pain. So not something like a disease of your nerves that then causes, some type of pain, but actual like pressure dynamics from like a disc herniation or some other type of injury that is like putting pressure on a nerve. He's like world class when it comes to that. And he was just saying how, the old story used to be if you have a disc herniation and you have back pain, oh, it's because of the disc herniation. Let's take out your disc herniation. But then we found after doing that for 30 years that the overwhelming majority of people who have disc herniations and then we take them out, they don't resolve their back pain. They still have back pain. And then we find that tons and tons and tons of asymptomatic people have disc herniations. So then the pendulum swung in the last 10 years toward disc herniations don't matter at all. It's all just sensitivity inside of your nervous system. It doesn't matter how you move. It doesn't matter what the disc is doing. If you get an MRI, you're going to die because you're going to nocebo yourself into the grave. Don't do it. It's the worst. But then we've had some systematic reviews and one meta-analysis come out that say, look, if you have a disc herniation and you have certain types of core weakness and you have certain types of other factors, there is a statistically significant correlation with back pain. And even in the most general sense, people who have disc herniations on the whole have more back pain than those who don't. Now, there's a gray area between, people can be opposite of that, but it's like this nuanced thing of your movement can matter. Probably if you have a few other factors stacked together. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's isolated and over here. The same way that you can have a disc herniation, as long as you don't have these other factors, you don't have pain, it's all good. And so this very long story here is for me saying like, yeah, I'm always trying to look at the context for somebody because things can matter, but they don't always matter. And a lot of the work of my work is trying to identify what matters for this person and then do something that has leverage on changing that thing. But then to not think that it's the disc herniation or the shoulder hernia or the shoulder rotation that is going to apply to everybody with that case. And that's, like you said, that's kind of a tough place to be because it does drive you crazy a little bit. But I think it's the reality of what's going on.
Yeah, and to anybody listening, like that's the sign of like a good doctor or a good coach. It's like when you ask them what appears to be a very simple question and they're just kind of like, I don't know, like let's see. We need more information. Like they should pepper you with like 1,000 more questions and have you do some stuff before they kind of guess at what's happening, right? It's like it's whenever like somebody just gives you oh yeah, it's this, then I'm just like my red flag just detector goes way up. So we talked a little bit about this offline. So injury prevention. So I now I just do it to troll people because it's it's fun, but like there are all kinds of S&C coaches who talk about injury prevention for combat sports and grappling sports. And I just think it's like hilarious that you could ever say something like that in a sport where we're literally cranking on people's joints. And like where it's not even like an unfortunate consequence of the sport. It's like the goal of the sport. Like we reward damage. Okay. Like if you get your shit snapped up in a tournament, you're going to be on a fucking highlight reel for the next 6 months on social media. Like you'll go viral. Like we love that shit. And so like to say that you can prevent injury is wild to me. And then like what a more sophisticated argument is kind of like people come at me and they'll be like, well, it's seen versus unseen, doing strength and conditioning, does prevent certain injuries from ever occurring. But in my mind, that's just injury reduction, not injury prevention, because prevention means something and reduction means another thing. So that's just my take. Maybe I'm being too literal. Maybe it's just a semantics argument, but like, what's your take on that?
I mean, I'm in the same boat where it's like, it's just not possible to be able to prove that in a real kind of way that doing a certain type of exercise is going to prevent your ankle injury. It's just not. Like we can track all the factors. We can't identify that thing you did was the thing that limited your instance of ankle injury. That being said, I think that there are very intelligent things to do that will reduce the likelihood that you get injured. And I don't know why that's not like okay enough for people. Like I don't And well, I guess I can figure because it's like if you're like I'm the guy who prevents injuries, we're taking a little bit of your like gusto and power away when we're like, well, maybe you're just reducing the overall likelihood. Because it's just not as one to one as anybody who is of a certain age like you and I knows that when you're tired and you go to put your shoes on, shit can happen, you know? And it's not because your back is not used. It's not because you didn't do enough back extension or flexion, whatever the exercise that the person's going to tell you to do. It's not because you didn't do enough of that. It's because of all these other factors, like you were tired, you were worn down, you were this, you were that. And that then you went and you went to put your shoes on. And like we said a half hour ago, your brain perceived something about that environment and that task that went, whoa, I don't like where this is going, given where we're at right now. And boom, throws a huge spasm at you that would not have been reduced by doing an exercise. It was just the cohesion of a certain number of events that clustered together that then made that mechanical stress in that moment reverberate inside your brain a certain way, that then if you just had slept an extra hour last night, maybe that would have been the thing that would have quote unquote prevented the injury. Is that there's just too many things that collide when it comes to things that make people get hurt, that we just can't say like, oh, you just didn't back squat enough, It's just not going to be like that. Hey, look, that doesn't mean it's not a good idea to squat. Please, for the love of God, squat. And probably the stronger you are in the squat, the less likely you'll get injured. But if you go to put your shoes on and you're tired and you just had a fight with your spouse and maybe finances are tight, and you drank a lot last night and haven't hydrated and you ate like an asshole, the chance that you might still get injured is still kind of up there. Those are the things that contribute to injury too. And so don't be hard on yourself because you didn't, back squat an extra day that week or some shit.
Yeah. I don't know why this popped into my head, but like, I do like a lot, like my primary demographic is just like old bastards who think they're young bastards, like myself. And so I'm going full bore into this, but,
Dude.
can you talk about like how like tissue changes as I've heard like some people's like, our tissues kind of dry out a little bit. Is that like, can you just talk a little bit more about like, you mentioned like the gliding,
Sure.
aspect of like certain types of nerve pain before, explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So it's like, we've got all this tissue in our body that is designed to stretch and then return back to its normal size. And in order to do that, it's got to slide across all the other structures that it neighbors. And so when you contract your muscles and you reach and you stretch your joints, like all these different tissues have a level, everything inside the body touches something else, and slides across it when we create movement. And so what can happen over time is that when we don't move in certain ways, when certain angles of stretch are not applied at a routine level, what can happen is those layers are no longer being asked to slide across each other because you're not moving in a particular way. Other tissues are sliding all the time because that's the way you move all the time, but if there are certain particular directions of motion that you're just not accessing, because life, from an ecological model, your circumstances are not asking you to do that. What can happen is your body registers like, oh, hey, look, we haven't gotten the trigger to move in a long time. And it kind of costs us energy to maintain this like, slidability. We got to spend like hydration coins over here. Collagen's got to stay refreshed. And, all of that costs physiological money. And the brain is always trying to cut costs, because if you cut costs, that means you don't have to eat as much. And if you don't have to eat as much, it means you don't have to go and find as much food. You don't have to go find as much food. You live longer because you're just leaner and running, like with less energy demand. So the brain is like, hey, look, we haven't moved a tissue in a long time. I've been watching. I've been keeping the ledger, and like we haven't been asked to reach behind back and turn a certain way since the 80s. So I'm kind of thinking it's safe to just paste all that shit up, no longer require oxygen back there. Wow. And then we can use that and we can fuel our liver because we drink a lot of beer, and that's what we do all the time. Or whatever. whatever the ecological approach is demanding of this individual. Yeah. And so what can happen is that then that tissue gets a little bit more pasted together because the body's not spending these like rejuvenation resources on it just because you haven't shown it that it's relevant. And that happens with age because not necessarily because the tissue is aging in a certain way, although there's some factors that are like that. More than the aging thing is just that your body has not been shown that it's relevant to spend the physiological resources to keep that moving a certain way. So it just adapted to that over time and said, okay, cool. And then it was happy about it because it ran less energy. And so then in an unconscious way, you rewarded your body for putting cement behind your shoulder a certain way because it didn't move that way for a long period of time. So people can blame that on aging, but that can also just happen if you get put in a cast and you don't move for a long time. The same thing is happening. It's just time without movement. That does correlate with age, but it's not necessarily because of age.
Like those videos of like the old guy doing the splits, and everyone's like, wow, it's like that motherfucker did splits every day of his fucking life, probably. You know what I mean? From like birth till now, you know what I mean? That's awesome. So sports specific training.
Fuck.
Let me have it.
Uh, oh man. So a big branch of work that I do is with professional and amateur motorcycle racers. I am a very slow, bad track rider of a motorcycle. I do the thing. I'm just very bad at it. But I work with people who are good at it. And you know, everybody's always asking me about like, you know, motorcycle specific training and all this other stuff and sport specific training, you know, because I do this activity. And it's a very understandable, logically defensible position that very intelligent people can assume because you can reason your way through it and it makes sense. But it's just not as big of a deal as people make it out to be. It's just not, you know, like making sure that your exercises look exactly like the positions that you're going to be in during the sport just does not work the way that you think it's going to work. And what we want to do is just get you generally fit and conditioned in the weight room. And sure, are there parameters that we can choose? There's a million ways to do that. Are there ways that are maybe more similar to the things that you do as opposed to less similar? Yes. Should we choose them? Yes. But do we have to like dance on the head of a pin about like exactly what position someone's arm is in because they're a basketball player versus a motorcycle racer? The answer is just 100% no. 100% no. And I'm sure you come in contact with this with BJJ all the time. It's just like, yeah,
it's fucking horrible. It's like, and I get it. It's like a lot of times it's like very well intentioned. And like you said, it's like, it seems like a logical, plausible thing. It's like, okay, like we do this movement a lot. Maybe if I load it, I'll be stronger at that movement. Okay. Like I get it. Like I totally understand where you're coming from. But the thing that is inherent and fundamental to exercise in general is its ability to either be regressed or progressed. You know what I mean? And like things that have limited potential for progression in my world immediately fall off the menu, right? And so that's like right away it has like a giant X you know, across it. The other thing is that, especially I would imagine for motorsports as well, it's like the physical postures that you get into in combat sports are fucking horrible. Like this shit is really good for fighting. It's literally miserable for everything else, right? So you want to be out of that posture. You want to be like getting strong 360 degrees, not just like everything on the front side of your body just fucking shortened to shit. You know what I mean? And it's similar to motorcycle riding, right? It's like the same kind of posture almost. If you just kind of like change the orientation of the rider, it's like exactly like a fighting posture.
100%. Yeah, dude, exactly. And I think the 2 points that are really, really, really great here is that, you know, we want to do exercise and make you, yes, better in the positions that you are in during your sport. And we also want to give the body very clear signals when you are not in your sport. And so that it can let those patterns go because of, you know, what we said earlier today, when the body learns to automate only one response to movement problems, which is then maybe bang, and you get all like curled up in the front, or shortened up in the back, depending on whatever position that your activity is putting you in. We need to cue the body that like, hey, that was cool for that, and then don't worry about it over here. Don't worry about it over here. Don't worry about it over here. So I have a lot of exercises for people that I tell them these are like anti-bike exercises. These are exercises to help your body like not just adapt to the bike, because actually you can get so good at something you get bad at it. And that's what we want to avoid with being like overly precious about sports specific training, is that like you would actually be better if you sometimes did less of what you do while it's hurt and got better at something that was a little bit different than what you do all the time, because then the body can apply different qualities to the thing that you do instead of just trying to get more and more and more narrow in your body's options.
Yeah, and it's like I part of like my being on a soapbox about this in the last couple of months is just because I think we just need like more sophisticated consumers. Because like when somebody sees something like that, like, oh, that seems like super innovative, that's super interesting. Like they do this sport and the exercise looks like this sport, and I want to go train with that guy. But like to the trained professional, like when I see that, when I see somebody doing something like that, like it just highlights their ignorance. It's because like you don't have anything else. It's just like, you took this thing that you just like put a weight in the guy's hand, and now it's the same thing. You know what I mean? Like it just highlights ignorance. You know what I mean? Um, yeah.
Yeah,
But
I think, yeah, with that, I think it's like, yeah, it's such a tricky thing, because it's like you want to help people understand how strength and conditioning can be relevant to what they do, but then also not have it be like, just do what you do and put a weight. And also it speaks to the fact that like skill training should be skill training and strength and conditioning should be strength and conditioning.
right.
When you try to make your skill training the base of your strength and conditioning, things go really, really poorly. Things go really poorly because you're going to get overuse injuries because you're using the same damn tissue all the time. You're just beating things up over and over and over again. They never get a break. And number two, look, we have local and we have central adaptations to exercise. What we mean is, I guess, literally at your arm. If you do, captains of crush over and over again for my grip guys on a motorcycle, yes, locally you will get adaptations to your forearm. But also if we do generalized activity in the weight room that's well prescribed, literally like the way your hormones fire off, the way you use oxygen, the way your heart pumps, all of these things that just generally make you better also happen. And so if you're only ever going to do something that's hyper specific, you miss out on a lot of the general adaptations of fitness. And we want to have both, because it all both right.
Yeah, and like people shouldn't forget that you already get so much of that exposure just from doing the sport, right? And so like you're already getting a lot of that anyway. And the only argument that I can really see for kind of like sport specific training, I just did air quotes for people who are listening, is like the temporal component of like if the sport demands that you perform for this amount of time for this many repetitions or whatever it is, like round lengths or whatever your sport is, okay, then fine, then you can set things up um towards the end of a general preparatory phase to get ready for that specific event. That is probably totally fine, but for the exercise selection, there's probably some better things to put on your menu.
100%. This is what we mean by like, yeah, there are definitely things that we can adjust to suit your demands better. But I think that that not being too worried about um, mimicking what you do in your sport all the time, or at least to appreciate like with my guys on the bike. A lot of guys complain about knee pain because they're in or at least just like quad fatigue because they're just in so much knee flexion with load in a high demand activity for like a half hour, and throwing the bike around and stuff. And so it's a lot of loaded knee flexion for a long period of time. And so it's just like, okay, well, I don't have to necessarily measure how far your foot pegs are off the floor and then set up your split squat to like somehow get that angle right. You know what I mean? Like, we're laughing about it because it's freaking ridiculous. But, can you just see how generalizably like, hey, maybe doing a split squat with a lengthened partial in the bottom third, maybe even a front foot elevated split squat, is just going to put you in that knee bend, and we're going to spend more time there. You should probably be spending more time in the bottom third of that split squat because you spend a lot of your time in bottom third of a split squat position. It's not exactly the same as on a bike, but your body doesn't need it to be more specific than that. Like that's specific enough. That's probably better, than trying to, measure the distance of the foot peg and get all that stuff right and make sure that you're only on the ball of your foot. Like all of that stuff is just majoring in the minors. And like you said, oftentimes leads to poor loading potential. Now you can't load it as well. You can't progress it as well. Now we're worse off than we were if you just would have back squatted the whole time.
Yeah. Oh, I almost forgot the shit on functional patterns. So this is
also let's do that.
Yeah, can't forget that. Very important stuff. It's also why, like, on paper, like I actually think some of the kind of like, again, air quotes, FP functional patterns exercise selection looks, wow. See, I keep air quotes those balloons.
I think it might have been FP actually.
Yeah. Fun party. That's what it stands for. Some of their exercises actually look super interesting. It's like tons of transverse plane movement. I'm like, oh, it's like actually looks pretty cool. But like some of the rationale and reasoning and like just insane claims that they make just turn me off in such a way that I hate them. And every single one of those exercises is you'd be hard pressed to progress that thing in a meaningful way. You know what I mean? In like a truly meaningful way, right? Like how do you, take some cable rotation, traveling, whatever, 15 yards with some rotational patterns. Like, how do you, like, where do you go from there after you've done that for 3, 4, 5 weeks? You know what I mean? Like, not very far, in case you were wondering. What's your take?
Yeah. And I think the FP people would argue like, well, after 3 to 5 weeks, they're going to be good, and we nailed it because we're so special. You know what I mean? Like we're so targeted and we understand the body a certain way. And so we don't need to or whatever. I don't know. Who knows if they'd actually say that or not. But as in my mind, the caricature of that type of person says like that's what somebody needs and that's going to be it. And the story is 3 to 5 weeks long, and that's it. No, I think my take on it is just it's silly. And it's ridiculous, to be trying to load those types of movements is ridiculous. Doing multi-directional movements, doing lots of transverse plane stuff, doing things, drills and, hey, like all of that is fine. But saying like, hey, what will make this better? Cable machine. Yeah.
So grab that. On a pull.
Yeah. Like, and then coming up with some very fancy sounding explanation as to why that horizontal pull is relevant and like, again, why so special and nobody else thought of it. It's like, well, people have been messing around with sports for a long time. I think if they would have thought of it, like it's not to say that we haven't figured everything out because there's a lot in sports science we haven't figured out. But when it comes to just generally moving around and strength and conditioning, like, there's a lot of things from that standpoint that we've got pretty much locked up. We're going to argue about sets and reps and work intervals and recovery. There's all these other variables, but like, I don't think the side shuffle, bunny hop, twist, cable chop, that like modern athletics has yet to discover and is going to be the secret sauce that then helps baseball pitchers crack 110 miles an hour. Like that's not going to be the thing that moves the dial in that direction. I just don't think it is. I think that it's mostly marketing. It's mostly a talk point. It's mostly to have like a hot take. It's mostly a calling card. It's mostly just stuff like that I think if we were to do any type of like controlled investigation about it, like in any type of like real deal objective kind of way, I think we'd be hard pressed to find that it really matters.
Yeah, like you are definitely not fucking diagnosing scoliosis just because somebody took their shirt off after a weekend course. You know what I mean? Like that shit is wild. You know what I mean? And then like what's his big thing is like curing scoliosis by doing some of this stuff. It's like the claims are off the. I mean, I think they're just funny at this point, but it's like they're like rabid. Like they're gonna come at us with like lanterns after this.
Please,
like that community is like fucking rabid. He actually Nowdy Aguilar actually like 6 people on. He'll be like, "Get them, boys," and like people will just come at you in the comments.
Well, I mean, I think that speaks to and I'm not trying to be that, I'm like breaking like my ethical code as a therapist, so not to try to like diagnose these people, but to me, what that reads as like there is a deep underlying anxiety there, because it needs to be defended.
Yeah.
You got to go get them. Like, you can't tolerate people making you conscious of some very reasonable criticism. You got to just grind it into the ground. Like, to me, that's also a huge red flag. Like, if somebody's real wild and like kind of out there and whatever, but can have a reasonable discussion with you about it, then I'm like, hey, look, I'm never going to do your shit, but like I could get where you're coming from, you know what I mean? And there's that. But the second people are like really, really, really rabid and really, really, really extreme in their defense of something, it's like, especially when it comes to movement, strength and conditioning, rehab, all of these things that are such young, professions that, are not only just young professions, but they exist in a very highly complex area of human experience where it's even if we have 300 years, there are a lot of things that are going to be hard to discover about, like, movement and rehab and pain, about like what changes those things. Like, we know how to get somebody squat better. We know how to get their heart better. We know how to do these like very, general things that do the big part of, what makes an athlete better. But when we talk about like changing somebody's movement better, this is a very open-ended kind of thing. So the second somebody gets real hardcore about it and wants to defend it really intensely, I'm just like, I just don't think that that bodes well for the underlying psychology of what's at that pattern.
So the other thing is like a lot of the before and after transformation type photos that people share, and not even just like functional patterns, but just that people share in general. And it's like my common like refrain, like when people ask me like, have you heard about this new thing, this new diet, or this new thing? It's like, I'm like, dog, everything fucking works.
Yeah.
Everything works. Like, just pick a thing, do the thing until it stops working, and then do another thing, and then do that until that stops working. Like the human body, like you mentioned earlier, like that spectrum of automaticity, like, the automatic reactions going kind of one way or the other. Like the human body is really fucking good at like adaptation and just optimization, so like just do the thing. Like my wife asked me, she's like, the other day, she saw this like Pilates bar thing, and she's like, oh, what do you think about this? And like 5 years ago I would have been like, maybe not, maybe like 10 years ago I would have been like, that's fucking trash, you know what I mean? Like, don't do that. Now I'm just like, yeah, fuck it, we'll go. You know what I mean? Like if that's gonna like get you excited about like doing a thing, then go for it. Like it all works,
Yeah. I don't think it speaks to this thing that I think the fitness industry really, I think, could do a better job of leading with and admitting, is that if your goal is to just be like generally healthy, lose weight, kind of doesn't matter how you work out. Really doesn't. Do whatever you want to do and do the things that matter to you. There are some general things like, should you be doing some form of systemized cardio? Like, because you can quote unquote do cardio wrong to the point where it can kind of, if you're doing high intensity all the time, it's going to be hard on your hormonal system and stuff. You can do that wrong. But I mean, if you're just in the ballpark of like a reasonable program,
like
whether or not
extremes.
Yeah. Like if you're just the ballpark is very large, and just whatever you're going to consistently do over time is the thing. And it's like, unless you have a very specific goal about, whether you want to be a powerlifter, whether you want to run marathons, whether you want to do something, if you don't have those kind of things, you're just trying to be like a fit, healthy person. All right, do Pilates. Whatever. Sure. You might run into a point where the core loading potential of Pilates collides with some other problem you have in your life, in which case then you want to do something, okay, do something else. But until that moment happens, do the things that are going to get you going. And I think the fitness industry thrives on scaring people into not doing anything because they think they're going to exercise wrong or do something like that and, totally mess themselves up. And it's like, that's just not the case, not the case.
Yeah, and as people who work and have worked in the fitness industry, nobody knows what the fuck they're talking about to begin with. Like, your favorite influencer is a fucking moron, I promise you.
Yeah. I think like at best, the majority of like fitness influencers on the internet are good at kind of like secondhand parroting, like okay information, but do not have like a real deep relationship do like core work, like seminal work inside of the field, and like why their chosen influencer that they heard it from in the first place, why that person even said it in the first place, like tracing a lot of these concepts back to their roots, and like how did we come to learn them, and how did we come to discover them, and how do you feel about the methods by which we came to research and discover that? Was that real or not? Like, how do you feel about that? There's conflict, like no connection to any of that. It's just whatever the messaging is that they heard somebody say once and it sounded smart when they said it, and it makes logical sense, and people go like, yeah, that's cool, I get it, and you seem like a nice person. You know, it's tough.
Yeah, Matt, I always appreciate our conversations, dude. I always get so much out of it, and you're definitely one of my favorite people. And yeah, I definitely want to do this again with you sometime. Where can people go to kind of learn more about you? And you're based in New York City. Any of my clients listening probably know who you are because I send a lot of my people to you. But where can people go to learn more about you?
Sure, man. Yeah, it's always so great to chat with you, and I love doing this. It's yeah, if you want to get in touch, I sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes make 90-second videos on Instagram if you want to come see and become an expert about, you know, everything. But it's, you know, at Matt Tolstoy on Instagram. You know, my website, you know, is just matttolstoy.com. That'll have all my contact info there and stuff like that. So if there's anything you feel like I can help you out with, you know, I'm in New York. I see people in person there, and yeah, and I do see people remotely for therapy, doing the body-based therapy stuff. So even if you're not local to that, but that stuff is interesting to you, feel free to get in touch, because that's also the type of work I do for people remotely.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to go ahead and link all that in the show notes so you can get easy access. And I can't thank you enough, man. This was awesome. I think this is probably the longest episode that I've done to date. They say that most podcasters don't get past episode 7.
Yeah.
And you're episode 8, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. So we did it.
We did it, Joe.
Yeah. Lex Friedman, watch that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dude, thank you again. And yeah, let's do it again.
This is awesome. Thanks for having me.
Later, bud.
Hey all, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure to like, comment, and follow if you're watching on YouTube, and to follow the show on the podcatcher of your choice so that you never miss an episode. It really means a lot. Thanks.